Bad guys everywhere. Battling crime all the time, speaking with pauses. That's right, I got a double dog dare to see if I could open up with a haiku, and I just did it. But for those of you that have seen me speak before, I speak loud, I speak fast. I'm like a linebacker coach in the cyber world. But I've got 3 hours of material, so I'm just going to hit right to it and see how much I can get through. Today what I want to do is first start with how are organizations detecting attacks? What are the indicators that made them put their capes on, swoop down, and start responding to computers? Then I wanted to talk about what attackers are doing nowadays, and then end up with what are the things that are occurring that are changing our incident response processes right now, making us up the ante. Just so you understand my frame of reference, in the last couple of years we've responded to ongoing computer intrusions at over 30 institutions, DoD contractor sites, government sites, e-commerce sites, banks, you name it, we've been there. And I had to get my conclusions out because I knew if I tried to get all this in an hour and 15 minutes, there's no way I'd get to my conclusions. So right away, the state of incident response, what are we dealing with? First thing, the sophistication of the attack tools outweigh the sophistication of our response tools. So the folks making counter-forensic techniques are better right now than the folks making the forensic techniques. In other words, we can beat ourselves. The folks that are developing exploits, could be government funded, may not be government funded, but we can develop exploits in-house, even at my organization, that we probably can't respond to effectively right now. So the sophistication is more advantageous to the bad guys. The reporting requirements, I just want to go over this very quickly. What we're seeing in incident response is the following. What the execs care about when there's a computer intrusion is the following. Do I have to tell my clients? Do I have to tell my shareholders? And what the heck are we doing about it? The technical managers, the next rung down, have to care about the following. We're doing this about it, and they're talking up the org chart, and they're going down the org chart to the technical operators saying, hey, what are we going to do about it? Technical operators have a whole different level of concerns. Are we collecting the data appropriately? Do we know the host-based and network-based indicators of attack? Do we know the full scope of the attack? How are we going to get ourselves out of this mess? But it's kind of interesting to know at the top level, the technical details absolutely don't matter. The incident owners that I've seen lack the org chart position to impact the whole incident response process. And there's a couple of examples of that. For example, a financial institution gets compromised. The incident handlers will say, let's take the compromised system offline. Well, who makes that decision? The incident handlers and the computer security guys, or over here, the business line owner that says, hey, you're not touching my computer, period. And it's been very interesting to see that the business line owners at stovepiped organizations have considerable power in dictating how response is done. There's the academic way to do it, but then there's the business line owner saying, you know what, you're not going to do it that way. And that kind of goes with number 4. Diligent incident response does not parallel management objectives. And when I say diligent incident response, I mean the academic approach. We all know that when you're responding to a computer security incident, or anything that's unlawful or unauthorized on your network, you want to collect data in a forensically sound manner, go through all that data, come up with sound conclusions that are accurate and documented appropriately. And 9 times out of 10, you're never going to get the time to do that, and you're never going to be given the charter to even do it in a lot of organizations. Problem 5, I've seen there's inexperienced personnel. There's not much we can do about this. Not all of you sit at a desk where your job is nothing more than incident response. Every major organization, for the most part, has incident response as an ad hoc job. And you're not just sitting around waiting for incidents to happen. You've got a day job that you have to do all the time, and then if an incident happens, you now have an extra duty. So most people don't get the repetitions they need to practice the skills of data collection, data analysis, making the whole process more scalable. Most people don't get to document it, and then later on I'm going to talk a little bit about malware analysis, because right now one of the big things I see in incident response teams, as the tools being used against us are getting more sophisticated, the incident response teams are taking 5 to 8 days to find the bad stuff on systems, and that's simply too long. So there needs to be a way for someone to quickly identify the malicious code, and you got to be able to say that goes in the good bin as a fair thing to have on your system, that goes into the evil bin of badness, and people need to do that triage fast. So that's another trend. Number 6 is definitely the case. It's taken a very long time to get information into the hands of the experts. When I look at a firm anywhere from 1,000 folks to 125,000 folks, what I've noticed is there's 10 guys that really know information security great, and you need to get the information they need into their hands as fast as possible so they can start doing the triaging to say, here's how we can handle this incident. And it takes often 2 to 3 weeks to get that information into their hands. What that information might be is full forensic duplications. It may just be log files. It may be just the router logs, anything, or firewall logs. But it's taken a long time. I made up a word here for number 7, technology widgetness. I get to come in as a consultant, look at how people respond, and then I'm lucky enough that I get to get out of Dodge afterwards, and they have to continue to muddle through whatever their incident's ongoing sometimes. And what I've seen is it's unbelievable how many widgets make up the technology used in incident response. One tool to collect data for this business unit, different tool to collect data in this business unit. This business unit doesn't even collect data in the first place. It's unbelievable. So they're kludging together arguably 7 to 9 different tools to get through the incident response process. Resolution always requires more resources than expected, and that's something that's unbelievable. Day one, if I'm responding to an incident, and if you're ever responding to an incident, I'd recommend you do this right out of the gates. Tell the guys up above every padded figure you can. Sir, this is going to take us 2 years to get through this, even though you might spend only a day or two. Start giving yourself time, because it's unbelievable how long the resolution can take. Once there's a compromise on your network, there's 3 ways for bad guys to get in, whether it's vulnerable services, valid credentials, or the backdoors they placed on your network. All 3 have different resolution to them. One, you're doing attack and penetration testing. For the backdoors, you're doing host diagnostic audits to look at, can you find the backdoors everywhere? For valid credentials, you're doing a whole password rollout, and these things take a lot of time, need to be coordinated, and there's a lot of pain points during that process. Definitely, I already covered lack of formal documentation. It is very rare that I respond to an incident as a consultant and I sit down with a firm and I say, hey, tell me what happened, and they say, here's the report. In fact, I don't think that's ever happened. What I get is, here's a stack of stapled together emails and a guy kind of talking haphazardly, sort of chronologically about what might have happened. Rumor mill starts pretty early too. Windows has been the primary target in the last, and I wish I knew the exact number, but at this point we're doing too many machines when we respond. But it's over 99% of the systems we're responding to that are compromised are Windows-based systems right now. For those who care, and I guess we're here because we care, we're not seeing any kernel level stuff. Now that might be because our tools wouldn't find it, and I'll tell you the truth, they won't find kernel level stuff right now. But at the same time, the user space stuff we're seeing is highly effective. It's getting the job done, and there's some advantages for bad guys using user space backdoors. Every time there's a new service pack, it could affect the kernel level backdoor, but it won't affect the user level backdoors that are effective. So we're seeing very few kernel level rootkits. In fact, the last one we saw was in the summer of 2004. That's not true. We just saw one. They're Linux based though, so we're not seeing it in Windows space. So how are organizations detecting these attacks? I went through the last 50 incidents. I did this last night, and the numbers didn't even change from last year when I did the same thing. Antivirus was the trigger mechanism for 8 of the last 50 computer intrusions we responded to. And what's interesting about antivirus is a lot of times when antivirus triggers, people have the response, thank God antivirus just went off. That means it prevented the attack. And that is definitely not the case anymore. I would argue if antivirus is triggering on a system, I'm going to give you a percentage, kind of like the presidential budget here, but I'm going to say probably 50% of the time if antivirus triggers, you have been compromised. There is malware on your system. If someone can break into your system, there is very little doubt in my mind they will beat the antivirus on that system. So we have a couple stats on that. This is stats from a case we started in April 2006, I believe. No, this is September of 2005. There were 12 different files used by the bad guys. All 12 were not publicly available in the current state. All 12 were not detected by antivirus, and they were basically packed in 5 different ways. They were using UPX, but they're using different versions of UPX. Here's a screenshot of tools that we saw in September of 2005. If you see a lot of these, you can recognize some of these tools. Like you'll see PW dump. Good guys use it, bad guys use it. You'll see PS exec because ps.exe was PS exec. That's a sysinternals tool. It's kind of interesting. One of the trends we're noticing that limits the effectiveness of antivirus is you can compress or encrypt your executables, packed executables, but another is if I'm a bad guy, and I break into your system, I'm doing the same things the good guys do. I'm going to break in with valid credentials, just like the good guys, and I'm going to use the tools you use to upload files, the tools you use to download files, and tools you use to execute files. I'll use the same ones. PS exec, something bad guys use as much as the good guys use. So it's kind of interesting that they're getting under the radar of antivirus that way. Just so you know, for those who care too, anytime you see a file called agent slave on your machine, it's bad. This next slide is June of 2006, and this was an interesting case. I would call this more of in the data pilfering category of cases. And it was, we responded to 12 different compromised systems, and on those 12 systems we found 10 different backdoors, and it's the same guys. And that's kind of neat because from our perspective, every system that toppled over was compromised. We had new host-based signatures to determine, new malware analysis to do, because if you don't know what their backdoors are doing, then you don't know how to look for them, then you can't determine the scope of compromise, and then you never get the cancer out of your network. So you got to do some of the malware analysis. And what we got here is a cleansed table that was right out of one of our reports, where you can see bad guys using SOX proxies. These proxies had password protection on it, they had command line passwords on it, they had registry values so that they could reconfigure their tools. This is pretty sophisticated stuff, and it was changing every 3 to 4 days. So that means there's some capability behind these backdoors where there's enough resources to update it, then update it again, then update it again, then update it again. And the signatures are different every time. So it was very hard to track where these attackers had been, where they're going, and how to get them out of the network. None of them, that was the point though, I got a little sidetracked, none of them triggered antivirus. All of them were very, very bad. IDS alerts. If you had to guess how many times IDS alerts threw me into a United jet flying to O'Hare Airport in the last 3 years, well, really the last 2, the answer is 0. IDS has not been the trigger mechanism for a couple years for the things that we're responding to. However, IDS has been fantastic once we've responded to an intrusion that's been detected via other means, and we've said, here's the network-based indicators of this attack. Command shell's going out with a prompt that says Microsoft version 5.1, whatever that network-based signature is. Then we go to the IDS structure, tweak all the sensors, and then kind of it's like a Christmas tree with the light bulbs lighting up. We see all the compromised hosts pop up in the sensors. But IDS has not been the trigger mechanism. Clients outside the company, arguably the worst trigger mechanism from an organization's perspective, because you're sitting at work one day, suddenly your phone rings and it's somebody else telling you you've been compromised. Right away, the incident is out of your control, and that's very frustrating. That's happened 8 of the last 50 we responded to, where someone outside the organization was telling the organization, you've got a problem. Most of them, it was law enforcement, but here's an example that came up December 23rd of 2005, where it was a client calling a bank. In the screen shot that you're looking at, this is a window that popped up into a woman's browser. The woman happened to be connecting to her online bank, so what does she think? The bank's been compromised. So what does she do? Starts the fire of calling the bank and calling everybody. And the bank called us to say, prove to this woman she was compromised and it's not our server. And right now that's the hack du jour. People that are at home are being targeted, and this is exactly what you see. I can tell you this, 9 people out of 10 will not fall for this, but this window right here hooked into Internet Explorer, and if this woman went to anything, any URL with the word mail in it, finance in it, bank in it, and 1,000 other keywords, this window would pop up in her browser. If she filled out the data in here, does anybody want to guess what country this data would go to? It definitely went to Russia sooner or later. It went to a compromised machine. It was a compromised website in Georgia. And the first people to shut off that website in Georgia wasn't law enforcement, wasn't the victim, it was the folks that run the DNS in the sky. And they recognized, hey, you know what, everything's going